The letter trembled in Katherine Stewart's raw, bruised hands as the stagecoach rattled down the dusty main street of Nogales, Arizona Territory. 1885 had promised a new beginning, but now, as the wheels ground to a halt, terror seized her chest. She'd fled one nightmare only to willingly enter another, all for the desperate hope that a stranger's advertisement might lead to something better than the life she'd escaped. "End of the line, madam," the driver called, his voice breaking through her reverie. Katherine tucked the wrinkled paper into her sleeve and adjusted her bonnet to better conceal the yellowing bruise at her temple. The dress she wore her finest, though threadbare at the cuffs, covered the worst of the marks her former employer had left upon her arms. Nogales sprawled before her, neither as grand nor as terrible as she'd imagined during the long journey from Boston. Dust kicked up by horses and wagon wheels hung in the air, coating the wooden storefronts with a perpetual layer of grit. Men in worn hats and dusty boots moved with purpose, hardly sparing a glance for the stagecoach's arrival. A few women in simple calico dresses hurried along the boardwalk, baskets looped over their arms. Katherine stepped down carefully, wincing as her ribs protested the movement. The driver handed down her single battered trunk, which held everything she owned in the world. Not much to show for 24 years of living. "You waiting for someone?" the driver asked, his brow furrowed with reluctant concern. Katherine nodded, scanning the faces around her. "Yes, Mr. Forrester. Owen Forrester." The name felt foreign on her tongue. The man she'd agreed to marry sight unseen after 3 exchanged letters. "The rancher," the driver whistled low. "His place is about 5 miles outside town. Surprised he ain't here to meet you." A cold knot of dread formed in Katherine's stomach. Had he changed his mind? She'd been explicit in her letters that she was coming with nothing but herself and a willingness to work. Perhaps he'd expected someone prettier, someone unmarked by life's cruelties. "I can take you to the hotel if that won't be necessary." A deep voice interrupted from behind her. Katherine turned, her heart hammering against her damaged ribs. The man who stood before her was tall, his broad shoulders tapering to a lean waist. His face, partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, was weathered by sun and wind. A short beard, the color of wheat touched by sunset, covered his jaw. But it was his eyes that caught her, a clear blue that reminded her of the sky over the ocean on the rare days her father had taken her to the shore as a child. "Miss Stewart?" he asked, removing his hat. She nodded, unable to find her voice. "Owen Forrester." He extended a hand, then seemed to think better of it when she flinched slightly. Instead, he gestured to her trunk. "Is this all your belongings?" "Yes," she whispered. He nodded once, lifting the trunk with ease. "My wagon's just there," he said, indicating a well-maintained buckboard with 2 chestnut horses harnessed to it. "We should get going if we want to reach the ranch before dark." Katherine followed him, hyper-aware of the curious glances from townspeople. The whispers were inevitable in a place this size. Another mail-order bride for the Forrester Ranch. She wondered how many had come before her, how many had failed whatever test awaited. Owen secured her trunk and offered a hand to help her onto the seat, careful not to touch her more than necessary. He seemed to sense her wariness, keeping a respectful distance as he climbed up beside her. "I apologize for being late," he said, his voice softer than she'd expected from a man of his size. "Had trouble with some calves this morning." "It's quite all right," she managed, folding her hands in her lap to hide their trembling. He clicked to the horses and the wagon lurched forward. As they left the town behind, Katherine stole glances at her soon-to-be husband. His profile was strong, a straight nose, firm jaw, and surprisingly gentle mouth. His hands, holding the reins were large and calloused, speaking of years of hard work. But they weren't rough or angry hands, she thought, like those she'd known before. "I hope your journey wasn't too difficult," Owen said after they'd traveled in silence for some time. "It was. Long," she answered, choosing her words carefully. "But the scenery was quite beautiful once we reached the territory." He nodded, seemingly relieved at her response. "It's different from Boston, I expect." "Very." Katherine looked out at the vast landscape. Rolling hills gave way to distant mountains, the land painted in shades of amber and rust. Compared to Boston's crowded streets and sooty buildings, this land seemed to breathe with a wild freedom she'd never known. "It's bigger than I imagined." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "That's what most people say when they first see it. Takes some getting used to, all this space." They fell into silence again, but it wasn't entirely uncomfortable. Katherine's mind raced with questions she dared not ask. What sort of man had she agreed to marry? His advertisement had been straightforward: a rancher seeking a hard-working wife, offering respect and security in return. His letters had been brief but kind, lacking the flowery promises she'd instinctively distrusted from other respondents. As the wagon rounded a bend in the road, a sprawling ranch came into view. A sturdy two-story house of timber and stone anchored the property, surrounded by various outbuildings and corrals. Cattle dotted the distant fields, and smoke curled from the house's chimney. "That's Crosswind Ranch," Owen said, a note of quiet pride in his voice. "Been building it up for nearly 10 years now." Katherine took in the sight, trying to imagine herself as part of this place. It was beautiful in its rugged way, well-maintained but not ostentatious. The house itself looked solid and welcoming, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. As they approached, a young man emerged from one of the barns, waving in greeting. "That's Miguel," Owen explained. "He's been with me since he was 15. Works harder than most men twice his age." The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the house, and Owen set the brake before climbing down. Katherine remained seated, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. She was miles from town, alone with a stranger, about to begin a life she couldn't fully imagine. Owen looked up at her, reading the hesitation in her face. "Miss Stewart," he began, his voice careful and measured, "I want you to understand something before you step down from this wagon. The arrangement we discussed in our letters, it stands. But I'm not expecting anything from you today or tomorrow or next week. You're here as my guest until you decide otherwise." Katherine blinked in surprise. "But the agreement was that you'd come to Nogales, and we'd see if we suited each other," he said firmly. "I'm a patient man, Miss Stewart. I can see you've had a long journey and you need rest more than anything else right now." His perception unnerved her. Could he see the bruises she'd so carefully hidden? Did he somehow know what she was running from? "I've prepared a room for you," he continued. "It has a lock on the door, and the key is yours to keep. My room is downstairs, on the opposite side of the house." The knot in Katherine's chest loosened slightly. She took the hand he offered, noting how he kept his grip light as she descended from the wagon. "Thank you, Mr. Forrester," she said quietly. "You're very considerate." Something flickered in his eyes, perhaps sadness, perhaps understanding. "Owen, please, and it's not consideration, Miss Stewart. It's simple decency." Miguel approached, tipping his hat respectfully to Katherine. "Señorita," he greeted her with a warm smile. "Welcome to Crosswind." "Miguel, would you see to the horses?" Owen asked. "I'll show Miss Stewart to her room." The young man nodded, taking the reins and leading the team toward the barn. Owen hefted Katherine's trunk once more and led the way to the house. The interior was surprisingly comfortable, with polished wooden floors and simple but well-made furniture. A stone fireplace dominated the main room, flanked by bookshelves filled with volumes that caught Catherine's eye. The kitchen beyond was spacious and clean, with copper pots hanging from a rack and herbs drying in bunches from the ceiling beams. Mrs. Alvarez comes in 3 times a week to help with cooking and cleaning, Owen explained as he noticed Catherine's gaze. She'll be here tomorrow. She's been preparing meals ahead for us. He led her up a staircase to a hallway with several doors. Opening one, he revealed a pleasant bedroom with a large window overlooking the distant mountains. A brass bed with a clean patchwork quilt stood against one wall, with a washstand, wardrobe, and small writing desk completing the furnishings. A colorful rag rug covered part of the wooden floor. "I hope this will be comfortable," Owen said, placing her trunk at the foot of the bed. "The bathroom is down the hall. We have indoor plumbing, though it can be temperamental. There's hot water for a bath if you'd like one after your journey." Katherine stood in the center of the room, momentarily speechless. After weeks of travel, sleeping in stagecoach stations and cheap hotels, the room seemed like unimaginable luxury. "This is very nice," she managed. "Thank you." Owen nodded, pointing out a small bell on the bedside table. "If you need anything during the night, just ring. I'm a light sleeper." He reached into his pocket and produced a small brass key, which he placed on the writing desk. As promised, the door locks from the inside. Katherine looked at the key, then at Owen's face, trying to understand this man who seemed so different from what she'd expected, what she'd feared. "I'll let you get settled," he said, moving toward the door. "Supper will be ready in about an hour, but if you'd prefer to rest, I can bring a tray up." "No," Katherine said quickly, not wanting to seem ungrateful. "I'll come down. May I have a bath first?" Owen's expression softened. "Of course, I'll prepare it for you." True to his word, within 20 minutes there was a gentle knock at her door. When she opened it, Owen stood at a respectful distance, informing her that the bath was ready. He'd left clean towels, and somewhat awkwardly mentioned that one of his late mother's dressing gowns was hanging on the bathroom door if she wanted something fresh to change into. The hot water was blissful on Catherine's aching body. She sank down until it covered her shoulders, trying not to look at the rainbow of bruises that marked her pale skin. The oldest were fading to sickly yellow-green, while the newer ones blazed purple against her ribs and back. The water stung the partially healed cuts on her shoulders, parting gifts from her former employer's walking stick when she'd announced her intention to leave. Katherine closed her eyes, letting the warmth seep into her bones. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to relax slightly. Whatever awaited her in this house, with this quiet, reserved man, surely it couldn't be worse than what she'd fled. And if it was, well, she'd survived before. She would survive again. After washing her hair and scrubbing away the travel dust, Katherine dried herself and slipped into the offered dressing gown. It was simple but made of soft flannel, clean and comforting against her skin. She twisted her damp hair into a knot at the base of her neck and returned to her room to dress for supper. Her best dress was wrinkled from travel, but she smoothed it as best she could before descending the stairs. The smell of cooking food drew her toward the kitchen, where she found Owen setting 2 places at a table near the window. He changed his clothes as well, wearing a clean shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. He looked up at her approach, and something in his expression made her self-conscious. Did she look as tired as she felt? Had she failed to cover a bruise? "You look better," he said simply. "More rested. Please sit." The meal was simple but delicious: roast beef, potatoes, and carrots, with fresh bread still warm from the oven. Owen explained that Mrs. Alvarez had prepared most of it ahead, and he'd only had to finish the cooking. Katherine ate cautiously at first, her stomach unaccustomed to regular meals after weeks of travel rations. But the food was good, and Owen seemed content with the silence, not pressing her for conversation. Finally, she gathered her courage to ask the question that had been nagging at her since their arrival. "Mr. Forrester, Owen, may I ask why you advertised for a wife?" He set down his fork, considering her question. "Honest answer," she nodded. "Loneliness," he said after a moment. "I've built something good here, but at the end of the day, there's no one to share it with, and I'm not much for saloons or socials." He looked down at his plate. "My parents died when I was 21. Fever took them both within a week of each other. I've been on my own ever since." "I'm sorry," Katherine said softly. He shrugged slightly. "It was 10 years ago now, but this place, it needs more than just me to make it a home. And you've never. There's been no one in town who caught your interest." A flicker of something amusement perhaps crossed his face. "Nogales isn't exactly brimming with eligible women. Those few who are available are looking for merchants or bankers, not ranchers who come to town smelling of cattle." Katherine nodded, understanding. In Boston, respectable unmarried women were similarly scarce. Most paired off well before they reached 20. "And you?" Owen asked carefully. "Why answer an advertisement from a stranger in Arizona territory?" Katherine tensed, her fork hovering above her plate. What could she tell him that wouldn't reveal too much? That wouldn't make him think he'd made a terrible mistake. "I needed a change," she said finally. "After my parents died, I worked as a governess for a family in Boston. The situation became untenable." She swallowed hard. "Your advertisement seemed honest. You didn't promise romance or luxury, just respect and partnership. That seemed safer than other options." Owen's gaze was steady, and Katherine had the distinct impression he was reading between her carefully chosen words. But he didn't press, merely nodded his acceptance of her answer. "Well," he said, "I meant what I said in the advertisement and in my letters. I'm looking for a partner, not a servant or a—" He broke off, seeming to search for the right word. "Possession," Katherine supplied quietly. His eyes met hers, and something passed between them, a moment of perfect understanding. "Yes," he said softly. "Exactly that." The rest of the meal passed in easier conversation. Owen told her about the ranch, 500 acres, with plans to expand. He ran mostly cattle, with some horses and a small section devoted to crops for their own use. Miguel had been with him for 5 years, and there were 2 other hands who lived in a bunkhouse near the barn, brothers named Joe and Thomas Parker. "They're good men," Owen assured her. "Respectful. They come to the house for Sunday dinner sometimes, but otherwise keep to themselves." After the meal, Owen insisted on clearing the table himself, telling Katherine she should rest. But she followed him to the kitchen, picking up a dish towel to dry as he washed. "I'm not an invalid," she said when he tried to object, "and I didn't come here to sit idle." A small smile curved his lips. "Fair enough. But the same applies to tomorrow and the next day. You don't have to prove anything to me, Katherine." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something warm unfurled in her chest at the sound of it in his deep voice. "It's been a long time since anyone reminded me of that," she admitted, carefully drying a plate. They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes before Owen spoke again. "Tomorrow, if you're feeling up to it, I thought I might show you around the ranch. You should know your way around if you're going to stay." The casual way he said it, "if you're going to stay," reinforced what he'd told her earlier. This was still her choice. She hadn't surrendered her freedom by stepping off that stagecoach. "I'd like that," she said. Later, as Katherine prepared for bed in her new room, she found herself listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch. The distant lowing of cattle, the occasional whinny of a horse, the creak of the house settling, all so different from Boston's clattering carriages and foghorns. Through her window, she could see more stars than she'd ever imagined existed, scattered across the vast black sky. She turned the key in her lock, testing it to be sure it worked. Then, after a moment's hesitation, she unlocked it again. Not because she trusted Owen Forrester, she wasn't ready for that yet, but because the lock represented a choice, and tonight, she chose to believe that she wouldn't need it. Katherine woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the unfamiliar sound of birdsong. For a moment, disorientation seized her. Where was the clamor of Boston, the shouting of street vendors, the clanging of the delivery wagons? Then memory returned. She was at Crosswind Ranch, 5 miles outside Nogales, about to begin a new life. Her body ached less this morning, the hot bath and good meal having eased some of her discomfort. She dressed in her second-best dress, a simple blue cotton that covered her arms and throat, and arranged her hair in a simple knot at the nape of her neck. A glance in the small mirror confirmed that the bruise at her temple was fading to a yellowish shadow, easily disguised with a careful arrangement of her hair. The smell of coffee and bacon drew her downstairs, where she found Owen at the stove, his back to her as he tended to a skillet. He turned at her footsteps, a smile warming his features. "Good morning," he said. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks," Katherine admitted, surprised to realize it was true. "Can I help with breakfast?" "Already done," Owen said, nodding toward the table where plates of eggs, bacon, and biscuits awaited. "Coffee's fresh, though. Cups are in that cabinet." Katherine poured herself a cup, noting with approval that the kitchen was well organized. Mrs. Alvarez clearly ran an efficient household during her visits. They ate breakfast with less awkwardness than the previous night's meal, Owen telling her about the day's plans for the ranch. The Parker brothers were moving some cattle to a new pasture, while Miguel was working with a colt that showed promise as a cutting horse. "And you?" Katherine asked. "What will you do today?" "Show you your new home," Owen replied, "if you're feeling up to it." Katherine nodded, genuinely curious about the ranch. "I'd like that very much." After breakfast, Owen fetched 2 horses from the barn, his own mount, a powerful black gelding named Thunder and a gentle sorrel mare called Penny for Katherine. "You ride?" he asked as they approached the horses. "A little," Katherine admitted. "It's been some years, though." Owen helped her mount without presuming to touch her more than necessary, showing her how to adjust the stirrups to her height. Penny stood patiently, seeming to understand her rider's nervousness. "She's a good horse," Owen assured her. "Steady and calm, she'll take care of you." The day was perfect for riding, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers. Owen led them at a leisurely pace around the property, pointing out landmarks and explaining the operation of the ranch. Katherine found herself admiring not just the beauty of the land, but the obvious care Owen had put into building his home. "The water rights are secure," he explained as they stopped by a stream that cut through the property. "That's vital out here. We've got good grazing land, and I've been selective about breeding stock." He pointed toward a distant ridge. "That's the northern boundary. Been meaning to expand in that direction, but the owner isn't willing to sell just yet." "It's very impressive," Katherine said sincerely. "You've built all this yourself," Owen nodded, a hint of pride in his eyes. "Started with 50 acres and 6 cows. My father taught me the business before he passed, said the key was patience and hard work." He smiled slightly. He was right. They rode on, eventually stopping at a rise that overlooked most of the ranch. Owen dismounted and helped Katherine down, careful to let her set the pace of their interaction. He spread a blanket on the grass and produced a canteen of water, and some apples from his saddlebag. "Thought you might like a rest," he said, settling himself a respectful distance from her on the blanket. "It's a lot to take in all at once." Katherine accepted the water gratefully, taking a long drink before handing it back. "It's beautiful here," she said, looking out over the landscape. "So different from what I'm used to, but beautiful." "Takes some getting used to," Owen agreed. "The space, the silence. Some folks find it too lonely." There was a question in his words, and Katherine considered her answer carefully. "I think, after Boston, a little loneliness might be welcome." She glanced at him. "Though I suppose it's not truly lonely if there are people you trust nearby." Owen met her gaze. "No, it's not," he said softly. "That's not loneliness, that's peace." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, eating their apples and watching a hawk circle overhead. Katherine found herself relaxing in Owen's presence. He didn't fill the air with needless chatter, didn't press her for information she wasn't ready to give. There was a steadiness to him that she found reassuring. "May I ask you something personal?" she ventured finally. Owen nodded, his blue eyes curious. "You said you advertised for a wife because of loneliness," Katherine began carefully. "But surely there must be easier ways to find companionship. Why go through all this writing letters, waiting months for someone to arrive, when you don't even know if we'll suit?" Owen considered the question, turning his apple core in his hands. "I suppose because I wanted something real," he said finally. "Not a convenient arrangement, not someone who saw me as a means to an end. I wanted someone who chose this life, who understood what it meant to build something together." He glanced at her. "Does that make sense?" It did, in a way that surprised her. Katherine nodded slowly. "It does." "But what if I'm not what you expected? What if we don't suit?" The corner of Owen's mouth lifted. "Then you'd be welcome to stay until you decided what you wanted to do next. I meant what I said, Katherine. You're not trapped here." The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within her. For the first time since arriving, Katherine felt a flutter of hope that perhaps this arrangement might work after all. They returned to the ranch house around midday, where they found Miguel mending a bridle on the porch. He greeted them warmly, his eyes lighting up when Owen mentioned Katherine's interest in the ranch operations. "She must see the new foal, patron," Miguel insisted. "It was born just last week, my hermoso." Owen raised an eyebrow at Katherine. "Would you like to?" The eagerness in both men's faces made her smile. "I would, yes." The foal was indeed beautiful, spindly-legged and curious, with a white star on its forehead. It frisked around its mother in the small paddock, occasionally stopping to nurse before resuming its exploration of the world. "He's going to be a good one," Miguel said proudly. "Strong legs, good chest. Smart to see how he watches everything." Katherine found herself charmed by the young man's enthusiasm. He couldn't be more than 20, but he spoke with the confidence of someone who knew his work well. As they walked back toward the house, Miguel tactfully excused himself to return to his duties, leaving Owen and Katherine alone again. "He seems very knowledgeable," Katherine observed. Owen nodded. "Miguel has a gift with horses, better than me if I'm honest. His family has worked with horses for generations." He paused. "His father worked this land when I first bought it, helped me get established. When he died, Miguel stayed on." "That speaks well of you," Katherine said quietly, "that he chose to stay." Owen shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "It's mutual respect, that's all." He glanced toward the house. "Mrs. Alvarez should be here by now. She'll be curious to meet you." Indeed, a plump, stern-faced woman in her 50s was waiting on the porch, hands on her hips as they approached. Her dark eyes missed nothing as she assessed Katherine, but her expression softened when Owen made the introduction. "Bienvenida, Señorita Stewart," she said, her accent thick but her English clear. "It is good Mr. Forrester has finally brought someone home. This house needs a woman's touch." "Thank you, Mrs. Alvarez," Katherine replied, a little intimidated by the woman's forthright manner. "You are too thin," the housekeeper declared, looking Katherine up and down. "We will fix this. Come, lunch is ready." Owen caught Katherine's eye and smiled apologetically as they followed Mrs. Alvarez inside. "She's been telling me for years that I need a wife," he murmured. "Now she'll tell you everything I've been doing wrong." The prediction proved accurate. Throughout the excellent lunch Mrs. Alvarez had prepared, the housekeeper kept up a running commentary on the state of the ranch house, the inadequacies of bachelor housekeeping, and her opinions on everything from the garden to the arrangement of furniture. "The curtains," she said, gesturing at the windows, "they need replacing. And the pantry organization hopeless. Mr. Forrester puts things wherever they fit." Owen bore the criticism with good humor, occasionally throwing Katherine a look that seemed to say, "You see what I've been dealing with." Katherine found herself warming to both of them Mrs. Alvarez's maternal bossiness and Owen's patient tolerance. It spoke of a household with genuine affection underlying the formalities. After lunch, Mrs. Alvarez shooed them from the kitchen, insisting she needed to put things right without interference. Owen suggested they sit on the porch, where a slight breeze made the afternoon heat bearable. "She means well," he said as they settled into the rocking chairs. "Though I suspect you'll be hearing a full inventory of my failings as a housekeeper for weeks to come." Katherine smiled, surprising herself with how natural it felt. "She cares about you, that's obvious." "She does," Owen agreed. "Her husband was the foreman here until he died of pneumonia 3 winters ago. She stayed on, said she had nowhere else to go. Truth is, I needed her as much as she needed the work." The afternoon passed pleasantly, with Owen telling stories about the ranch and Katherine occasionally sharing carefully edited tales of her life in Boston. She spoke of her parents, her father, a clerk at a shipping company, her mother, a seamstress, and their small but happy home, until consumption claimed them both when Katherine was 20. She skipped over the darker chapters, her desperate search for employment, the relief of finding the governess position, and the gradual realization that her employer's interest in her went far beyond her skills with his children. As evening approached, Katherine found herself stifling yawns. The day's activities, though not strenuous, had taxed her still recovering body. "You're tired," Owen observed. "Don't feel you have to stay up on my account." "I should help with dinner first," Katherine protested. Owen shook his head. "Mrs. Alvarez has left us enough food for an army. Go rest." "I'll bring you a tray if you'd like." Katherine hesitated, torn between gratitude for his consideration and a nagging worry that she wasn't fulfilling her end of their arrangement. She had come to be a wife, after all, to cook and clean and make this house a home. Yet Owen seemed content to let her find her own pace. "Thank you," she said finally, "but I think I'd prefer to come down for dinner if that's all right. I'm tired, not ill." Owen's smile reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. "Of course, whenever you're ready." In her room, Katherine lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling as she tried to make sense of her situation. Owen Forrester was nothing like she had expected, nothing like the men she'd known before. His patience, his respect for her boundaries, his quiet competence, all were qualities she'd scarcely dared hope for. But Katherine knew better than to trust first impressions. Men could hide their true natures when it suited them. Her former employer had seemed kind at first, too right until the night he'd cornered her in the nursery after his wife had gone to bed. Still, something about Owen felt different. There was an openness to him, a steadiness that seemed genuine, and the way Miguel and Mrs. Alvarez spoke of him with affection and respect, not fear, told its own story. Catherine's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at her door. She rose quickly, smoothing her dress before opening it. Mrs. Alvarez stood in the hallway, arms full of fabric. "Señorita Stewart," she said briskly, "I have brought some things for you to see." Catherine stepped aside, allowing the older woman to enter. Mrs. Alvarez laid her burden on the bed, revealing several dresses in varying styles and colors. "These belong to Mr. Forrester's mother," she explained. "He asked me to bring them from the trunk in the attic. They have been well preserved, and I think they may fit you with small alterations." Catherine touched the dresses with reverence. They were simple but well made, of good quality fabric that had withstood the years. A deep blue one caught her eye, practical yet pretty, with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. "This is very kind," she said softly, "but I couldn't possibly." "Señorita, Mrs. Alvarez interrupted, her expression softening. "Mr. Forrester is a good man, the best I know. He would not want you to feel, how do you say, obligated. But he also sees that you have few clothes and he wishes to help without causing offense." Catherine felt heat rise to her cheeks. Of course, Owen had noticed her limited wardrobe. How could he not? The thought of wearing his mother's dresses felt strangely intimate, yet also practical. Her own clothing was worn and insufficient for ranch life. "Please thank him for me," she said. "I would be honored to use them, Mrs." Alvarez nodded approvingly. "Good. Now, this blue one, I think it will suit you best. Let me see if it needs adjusting." The older woman's practical attitude made the situation less awkward than it might have been. She helped Catherine try on the blue dress, pinning it in places where it needed taking in. Mrs. Forrester had been slightly taller and fuller figured than Catherine, but the alterations required were minor. "I will fix these tonight," Mrs. Alvarez declared. "Tomorrow you will have proper clothes for the ranch." She paused, studying Catherine with shrewd eyes. "You are healing, yes. The bruises, they are from before." Catherine froze, instinctively raising a hand to her throat where one of the fading marks must have been visible. "I had an accident," she said weakly, "before I left Boston." Mrs. Alvarez's expression made it clear she didn't believe the explanation, but she didn't press. Instead, she patted Catherine's hand gently. "The past is past, Nina. Here you are safe." When the housekeeper had gone, taking the dresses with her, Catherine sat heavily on the edge of the bed. Had Owen noticed her injuries as well? Was that why he was being so careful with her, so respectful of her space? The thought was both mortifying and strangely comforting. If he had seen and understood and still welcomed her into his home. Catherine pushed the thought aside. It was too soon to trust, too soon to believe that her luck had truly changed. One day at a time, she reminded herself. That was all she could manage for now. Dinner that evening was a quiet affair. Owen seemed lost in thought, though he made an effort at conversation, asking about her impressions of the ranch and if she'd found everything she needed in her room. "Yes, thank you," Catherine replied. "Mrs. Alvarez showed me your mother's dresses." "It's very kind of you to offer them." Owen looked slightly embarrassed. "I hope you don't mind. I thought they might be useful until you have a chance to get new things made in town." "Not at all," Catherine assured him. "It's a practical solution." Relief crossed his features. "Good. I wasn't sure if it would seem presumptuous." The word hung between them, laden with meaning. Everything about their situation was presumptuous in a way, two strangers contemplating a life together based on a few letters and a desperate hope for something better than loneliness. "Owen," Catherine said suddenly, setting down her fork, "I feel I should be more useful. You've been very kind, but I came here to work, to help build this place with you, not to be a guest." He studied her, his blue eyes thoughtful. "What would make you feel more at home, Catherine? Tell me, and if it's in my power, you'll have it." The question caught her off guard. What did she want? Security, certainly. Respect. A place where she could contribute and feel valued. But those weren't things Owen could simply give her. They had to be built over time with trust. "I'd like to learn the routine of the house," she said finally. "To cook, to keep the accounts, to understand how everything works, not all at once, but gradually, to earn my place here." Owen nodded slowly. "That seems fair." "But Katherine," he leaned forward slightly, his gaze intent, "I need you to understand something. You don't have to earn your place here. It's already yours if you want it." The sincerity in his voice made her throat tighten. "Thank you," she whispered. Later, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Katherine felt a tentative peace settle over her. Owen sat nearby, smoking a pipe, the sweet scent of tobacco mingling with the evening air. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "It is," he agreed, his voice equally quiet. "Never gets old, watching the day end like this." Katherine glanced at him, his profile silhouetted against the fading light. "How did you come to be here? In Nogales, I mean." Owen tapped his pipe against the porch rail, considering the question. "My father brought us west when I was 12. He'd been a farmer in Illinois, but the land was played out and he had a brother who'd done well in Arizona territory. We started small, worked hard." He smiled slightly. "Mother hated it at first, the dust, the heat, the isolation. But she came to love it in time." "And you, did you always love it?" "From the first moment," he said simply. "Something about this land spoke to me. The freedom of it, maybe, the challenge." He glanced at her. "What about you? Did you always live in Boston?" Katherine nodded. "Born and raised." "My father talked about going west sometimes, especially after the war, but Mother wouldn't hear of leaving her family." She gazed out at the darkening landscape. "I used to read books about the frontier, though, stories about pioneers and new beginnings." "And now you're living one," Owen observed. "Yes," Katherine agreed, surprised to realize it was true. Here she was, thousands of miles from everything she'd known, starting a new life in a place that existed only in imagination a few weeks ago. "I suppose I am." They sat in companionable silence until the first stars appeared. Then with reluctance Katherine rose. "I should turn in, it's been a full day." Owen stood as well. "Of course, sleep well, Katherine." She hesitated at the door, feeling she should say more but unsure what. Finally, she simply nodded. "Good night, Owen." That night, for the first time, Katherine left her door unlocked without a second thought. The days fell into a rhythm at Crosswind Ranch. Katherine rose early, joining Owen for breakfast before he headed out to work. She spent mornings with Mrs. Alvarez on the housekeeper's visiting days, learning the particulars of running the ranch house. The older woman was a patient teacher, showing Katherine how to manage the temperamental wood stove, where supplies were kept, and the best ways to preserve foods for the winter months ahead. On days when Mrs. Alvarez wasn't there, Katherine experimented with cooking on her own, using the woman's recipes and sometimes adding touches from her mother's kitchen. Owen ate everything she prepared with appreciation, even when her early attempts at biscuits could have doubled as doorstops. "Practice makes perfect," he said with a straight face, though his eyes twinkled as he reached for another rock-hard biscuit. Afternoons often found Katherine in the small garden behind the house, weeding and harvesting the vegetables Mrs. Alvarez had planted. The physical work was therapeutic, allowing her mind to quiet as her hands stayed busy. Sometimes Owen would join her for a late dinner, and they'd sit on the porch afterward, talking about their days. Katherine's bruises faded to yellowed shadows and then disappeared entirely. The cuts healed, leaving only the faintest lines on her pale skin. As her body recovered, so did her spirit. She found herself laughing more often, speaking more freely, moving through the house with growing confidence. Owen noticed the change. One evening, as they finished their meal, he said quietly, "You're looking well, Katherine, stronger." She glanced up, surprised by the observation. "I feel stronger," she admitted. "More myself, somehow," he nodded, seeming pleased. "The desert has a way of stripping things down to essentials. What's true remains, what isn't falls away." It was a poetic thought from a man who generally spoke in practical terms, and it caught Catherine's attention. "Is that why you stay? Because it's true?" "Partly," Owen acknowledged. "Partly because it's home." He hesitated, then added, "I hope it might become home for you too in time." The gentle hope in his voice touched her. "It already feels more like home than anywhere I've lived in years," she said honestly. Owen's smile warmed his entire face, transforming his usually serious expression into something that made Catherine's heart beat faster. She looked away, suddenly flustered by her reaction to him. 3 weeks after her arrival, Owen announced at breakfast that he needed to go into Nogales for supplies. "Would you like to come along?" he asked. "You could visit the dressmaker, perhaps get measured for some new clothes." Katherine hesitated. The idea of town of people and questions and curious stares made her anxious. But she couldn't stay isolated at the ranch forever, and she did need clothes of her own, though Owen's mother's dresses had served her well so far. "Yes," she decided. "I'd like that." They set out after breakfast, taking the wagon rather than riding. The journey passed pleasantly, with Owen pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the area. As they approached Nogales, Katherine felt her nerves returning, but Owen's steady presence beside her was reassuring. The town was busier than when she'd arrived, with more people on the streets and several wagons parked outside the general store. Owen helped her down from the wagon, keeping a protective hand near but not quite touching her elbow as they navigated the boardwalk. "Fletcher's Mercantile first," he said, nodding toward the large store at the end of the street. "Mrs. Fletcher does dressmaking in the back room. Then we'll get the supplies and have lunch at the hotel before heading home." The plan was sensible, but Katherine still felt exposed as they walked down the street. She was acutely aware of the curious glances from townspeople, the whispers that followed their passage. Inside Fletcher's, they were greeted by a thin, energetic man with spectacles perched on his nose. "Forrester," he called. "Thought we might be seeing you soon. Running low on coffee, are you?" "Among other things," Owen replied good-naturedly. "Mr. Fletcher, may I introduce Miss Katherine Stewart?" "Katherine, this is Albert Fletcher, purveyor of all things necessary and most things desirable in Nogales." Fletcher's eyes widened slightly as he took in Katherine's presence. "Miss Stewart, a pleasure indeed. We've heard that is," my wife mentioned, he broke off, flustered. "That I'd arrived," Katherine finished for him, keeping her voice even. "Yes, about 3 weeks ago now. And already making Crosswind look more civilized," Owen added smoothly. "Is Mrs. Fletcher available for a consultation? Miss Stewart would like to order some new dresses." Fletcher nodded eagerly. Of course, of course. Martha is just in the back. I'll fetch her directly." As he hurried away, Katherine gave Owen a grateful look. His casual introduction and easy manner had diffused some of the awkwardness of the situation. Mrs. Fletcher proved to be a plump, friendly woman with clever hands and a keen eye for fashion. She ushered Katherine into a small room at the rear of the store, clucking over the altered hand-me-downs she was wearing. "These are well made, but not quite right for your figure, dear," she said, measuring tape in hand. "We'll do much better. What styles do you prefer?" Katherine explained her needs: practical dresses for everyday wear at the ranch, perhaps one nicer outfit for Sundays or trips to town. Mrs. Fletcher took notes, occasionally suggesting fabrics or design elements. "And what colors do you favor?" she asked. Katherine hesitated, realizing she'd spent so many years in serviceable black or gray that she hardly knew her own preferences anymore. "I'm not sure," she admitted, Mrs. Fletcher studied her thoughtfully. "With your coloring, blues and greens would be lovely. Perhaps a warm brown for every day. And I have a lovely rose-colored calico that would bring out the pink in your cheeks." The attention to her appearance not as a potential object of unwanted desire, but as a woman with her own tastes and beauty, was both strange and wonderful to Katherine. She nodded, warming to Mrs. Fletcher's enthusiasm. By the time they finished, Katherine had ordered 3 everyday dresses, 1 Sunday best, and the necessary undergarments to go with them. Mrs. Fletcher promised the first 2 would be ready within a week, with the others to follow. Katherine rejoined Owen in the main store where he was selecting items from Fletcher's extensive inventory. He looked up at her approach, a question in his eyes. "All settled," she assured him. "Mrs. Fletcher has been very helpful." "Good," he said, seeming genuinely pleased. "I've almost finished here. Just need to add coffee to the list. Owen Forrester." A female voice interrupted. "Is that you hiding behind those feed sacks?" A well-dressed woman in her 30s approached, her smile wide and her manner forward. She was attractive in a bold way, with carefully styled hair and a dress that emphasized her figure. "Mrs. Bradley," Owen greeted her, his tone polite but noticeably cooler than when he'd spoken to the Fletchers. "Good morning." "It's been ages since we've seen you in town," the woman continued, her eyes darting curiously to Katherine. "And now I see why. Won't you introduce me to your friend?" Something in her emphasis on the last word made Katherine stiffen. Owen's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mrs. Bradley, this is Miss Katherine Stewart," he said formally. "Katherine, Mrs. Olivia Bradley, wife of the bank manager." Katherine nodded politely. "How do you do, Mrs. Bradley's assessing gaze swept over Katherine, taking in the altered dress, the simple hairstyle, the lack of jewelry or adornment. "Miss Stewart," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "How lovely to meet you. Are you visiting our little town?" Before Katherine could respond, Owen answered for her. "Miss Stewart has come from Boston to join me at Crosswind Ranch." Mrs. Bradley's eyebrows rose. "I see," she said, in a tone that suggested she saw a great deal more than was being said. "How progressive of you both." The insinuation was clear, and Katherine felt heat rise to her cheeks. Owen stepped slightly closer to her, not quite touching but making his position clear. "If you'll excuse us, Mrs. Bradley," he said firmly, "we have several more stops to make today." The woman's smile tightened. "Of course. Do give my regards to your household." She nodded to Katherine. "Miss Stewart, I'm sure we'll be seeing more of you now that you're settled." She swept away, leaving an uncomfortable silence in her wake. Katherine stared at the floor, mortified by the encounter and its implications. "I apologize for Mrs. Bradley," Owen said quietly. Well, there's no kind way to say it. She's the town gossip, and she's had her eye on Crosswind for years." Katherine glanced up, surprised. "On the ranch," a faint smile touched Owen's lips. "On its owner, more specifically. Her husband is 20 years her senior and not in the best of health. She's been planning her next move since they arrived in Nogales." "Oh." Katherine wasn't sure how to respond to this revelation. The idea that Owen might have had other options, women who actively pursued him, hadn't occurred to her. "I see." Owen shook his head slightly. "No, I don't think you do." He lowered his voice so only she could hear. "There's a difference between wanting someone for what they have and wanting someone for who they are, Katherine. I've never been interested in the first kind of wanting." The simple statement, delivered without drama or expectation, settled something in Katherine's chest. She nodded, understanding more than she could easily express. "Let's finish our shopping," she suggested. "I'm looking forward to lunch." The rest of their visit to town passed without further incident, though Katherine was aware of curious glances following them. Lunch at the hotel dining room was pleasant, the food surprisingly good. Owen was recognized by several patrons, who nodded respectfully or stopped briefly to exchange greetings. Each time, he introduced Katherine as Miss Stewart from Boston, neither confirming nor denying the nature of their relationship. On the journey home, Katherine found herself reflecting on the day. Despite the awkward encounter with Mrs. Bradley, she'd enjoyed the outing more than she'd expected. There was a satisfaction in being seen with Owen, in being introduced as someone connected to Crosswind Ranch rather than as a nameless traveler. "You're quiet," Owen observed as the wagon rolled along the familiar road. "Just thinking," Katherine replied. "It was an interesting day." Owen glanced at her, a question in his eyes. "Too much at once?" "No," she said thoughtfully. "Not too much. Different, but good different, I think." He nodded, seeming to understand what she couldn't quite articulate. "It gets easier. The stairs, the questions, they'll fade in time." Mrs. Bradley seemed quite interested in you, Katherine ventured, surprising herself with the observation. Owen's expression darkened slightly. "Mrs. Bradley is interested in Crosswind and what it represents: security, stability, status in the community." He shook his head. "She wouldn't last a month on the ranch. She'd be bored to tears by the work and isolation." "Unlike some of us," Katherine said lightly. Owen's gaze caught hers, serious despite her tone. "Yes," he agreed softly. "Unlike you." Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement that went beyond words. Katherine looked away first, her cheeks warming under his steady regard. They returned to the ranch as the sun was beginning its descent toward the western hills. Miguel came out to help with the wagon, his eyes lighting up at the sight of the supplies. "Coffee," he exclaimed, lifting a sack. "Gracias a Dios, we were almost out." Owen laughed, the tension of the day easing from his shoulders. "Can't have that. Mrs. Alvarez would have my head." They unloaded the wagon together, carrying supplies to the house and the barn as needed. Katherine insisted on helping, though Owen tried to dissuade her from lifting the heavier items. The work was satisfying, a tangible reminder that she was part of this place now, contributing to its operation. As dusk fell, they sat on the porch with cups of the precious new coffee, watching as stars appeared one by one in the deepening blue of the sky. The day's events had left Katherine feeling strangely vulnerable, more aware than ever of the precariousness of her position. She wasn't Owen's wife, nor yet truly the mistress of Crosswind. She existed in an in-between state, neither guest nor family. "Owen," she said finally, her voice quiet in the gathering darkness, "may I ask you something?" "Of course." "What happens if this doesn't work? If we find we don't suit each other after all?" He was silent for a long moment, and Katherine feared she'd offended him. But when he spoke, his voice was calm and measured. "Then we would part as friends," he said simply. "I would ensure you had the means to go wherever you wished, back east to California, wherever you felt you could build a life. And I would count myself fortunate to have known you, even briefly." The sincerity in his words brought unexpected tears to Katherine's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for being so decent about all of this." Owen set his cup down and turned to face her, his expression earnest in the fading light. "Katherine, I need you to understand something. When I placed that advertisement, I wasn't looking for someone to cook my meals or warm my bed. I was looking for a partner, someone to share this life with, to build something lasting." He paused. "I know you came here carrying burdens that weren't of your making. I can see it in the way you flinch sometimes, the way you guard yourself. And that's all right. We all have our scars." Katherine sat very still, hardly breathing as he continued. What I'm trying to say is I'm not in any hurry. Whether it takes weeks or months or even years for you to feel safe here, to know your own mind about staying or going, that's all right. I've been waiting a long time for the right person. I can wait a while longer to know if that person is you. The tears Katherine had been holding back spilled over. She ducked her head, embarrassed by the display of emotion, but Owen didn't comment or try to comfort her. He simply sat quietly, giving her the space to feel whatever she needed to feel. When she could speak again, Katherine said, "I don't deserve such patience." "It's not about deserving," Owen replied. "It's about recognizing something worth waiting for." His words hung in the air between them, full of a meaning that neither was quite ready to name. Katherine wiped her eyes, taking a deep breath to steady herself. "I should turn in," she said finally. "It's been a long day." Owen nodded, rising with her. "Sleep well, Katherine." At the door she paused, looking back at him silhouetted against the darkening sky. "Owen, yes, I'm glad I came here," she said simply. "Whatever happens next," his smile was visible even in the dim light, "so am I." That night, as Katherine prepared for bed, she found herself studying her reflection in the small mirror. The woman who looked back at her was different from the one who had arrived at Crosswind Ranch a month ago. Her face had filled out slightly from regular meals, and there was color in her cheeks from days spent partially outdoors. But the most significant change was in her eyes. They were clearer now, more direct, less haunted. "You're healing," she thought to herself, "just as he promised you would." The next morning, Katherine woke before dawn, restless after a night of dreams she couldn't quite remember. Rather than lying in bed waiting for the household to stir, she dressed quickly and made her way downstairs. The kitchen was dark and quiet. Katherine lit a lamp and set about making coffee, finding comfort in the routine Mrs. Alvarez had taught her. As the water heated on the stove, she mixed biscuit dough, working by the warm glow of the lamp. She was so absorbed in her task that she didn't hear Owen enter until he spoke from the doorway. "You're up early," he said softly. Katherine turned, a hand pressed to her chest in surprise. "You startled me." "Sorry," he said, moving into the kitchen. "Couldn't sleep." She shook her head. "Just restless, I suppose." Owen nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Happens to me sometimes. Usually means a storm's coming." He glanced toward the window, though the night sky was still too dark to reveal much. "Need help with breakfast?" The offer surprised her. Despite his willingness to perform household tasks when necessary, Owen generally left the kitchen to Katherine or Mrs. Alvarez. "You could set the table," she suggested, returning to her biscuits. They worked together in companionable silence, moving around each other in the small space with growing ease. Owen set out plates and cups, then sliced some ham while Katherine finished the biscuits and put them in the oven. By the time the coffee was ready, the eastern sky was beginning to lighten, and the kitchen was filled with the comforting smells of breakfast. "This is nice," Owen commented as they sat down to eat. "Being up before the world." Katherine nodded, understanding what he meant. There was something intimate about sharing these quiet moments before the day's demands began in earnest. "What are your plans today?" she asked, passing him the butter for his biscuit. "Fence mending in the north pasture," Owen replied. "One of the steers broke through yesterday. Should take most of the day to fix properly." He glanced at her. "You, laundry," Katherine said, "and I thought I might try making a pie. Mrs. Alvarez left apples from her sister's tree." Owen's eyes lit up. "Apple pie, that was my mother's specialty." "I'm not promising it will be as good as hers," Katherine warned, though she was pleased by his enthusiasm. "I'll be the judge of that," Owen said with a smile. "Might even come home early if there's pie as incentive." The moment was so domestic, so normal that Katherine felt a sudden swell of emotion. This was what she'd hoped for but hadn't dared expect, this easy companionship, this sense of building a shared life. After breakfast, Owen left for his work, and Katherine set about her tasks for the day. Laundry was physical labor, especially without modern conveniences, but she found satisfaction in seeing the clean clothes hanging on the line behind the house, flapping gently in the breeze. By mid-afternoon, the apple pie was in the oven, filling the kitchen with its sweet, spicy aroma. Katherine wiped her hands on her apron, pleased with her efforts. She had just begun to think about dinner preparations when a sound from outside caught her attention. It wasn't Owen returning, the hoofbeats were too numerous for that. Moving to the window, Katherine saw a group of riders approaching the house. 6 men, strangers all, their horses kicking up dust as they rode into the yard. A knot of anxiety formed in Katherine's stomach. She was alone at the house. Owen and Miguel were working in the distant pasture, and the Parker brothers were helping a neighboring ranch with a cattle drive. The riders drew rein in front of the house, and one, clearly the leader, dismounted. He was a tall man with a cruel set to his mouth and eyes that reminded Katherine too much of her former employer. He looked up at the house, seeming to assess its worth. Taking a deep breath, Katherine removed her apron and went to the door. She wouldn't cower inside like a frightened child. This was her home now, or at least, it was becoming so, and she would face whatever came. She opened the door but remained on the threshold, one hand on the frame. "May I help you?" she called, proud that her voice remained steady. The leader looked surprised to see her, his eyes narrowing as he took in her appearance. "Well now," he drawled, "what have we here? Didn't know Forrester had himself a woman." Katherine lifted her chin slightly. "I'm Katherine Stewart. Mr. Forrester is not at home at present. If you have business with him, you'll need to return later." The man stepped forward, a smile that didn't reach his eyes spreading across his face. "No need for formalities, miss. We're old acquaintances of Owen's. I'm sure he wouldn't mind if we waited for him inside." Every instinct warned Katherine not to allow these men into the house. "I'm afraid that's not possible," she said firmly. "But I'd be happy to tell Mr. Forrester you called. Whom should I say came by?" A flash of anger crossed the leader's face. "The name's Garrett," he said. "Garrett Wade. Owen and I have some unfinished business to discuss." The name meant nothing to Katherine, but the tension in the air was palpable. The other riders had spread out slightly, their positions suddenly seeming more strategic than casual. "I'll tell him you called, Mr. Wade," Katherine repeated. "Good day to you." She began to close the door, but Wade's hand shot out, preventing it from closing. "Now hold on there, miss. I've ridden a long way to see Owen. I think I'll just wait right here until he gets back." Katherine's heart hammered in her chest, but years of dealing with unwanted advances had taught her not to show fear. "Remove your hand from my door, Mr. Wade," she said, her voice cold. For a tense moment, she thought he might force his way in. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed and stepped back, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "Feisty one, aren't you? Owen always did like them spirited." He turned to his companions. "Boys, looks like we'll be camping out here until our friend returns. Make yourselves comfortable." The men dismounted, leading their horses to the water trough by the barn. They didn't approach the house again, but their presence in the yard was a clear threat. Katherine closed the door, turning the key in the lock for good measure, though she knew it would offer little protection if they decided to force entry. Moving swiftly through the house, she checked that all windows and doors were secured. Then, heart pounding, she went to Owen's study and opened the bottom drawer of his desk. Just as he'd told her during her orientation to the house, there was a revolver there, kept loaded in case of emergency. Katherine had never fired a gun, but her father had owned one, and she understood the basic principles. She checked that it was loaded, just as Owen had shown her in case you ever need to protect yourself. Then returned to the kitchen where she could keep watch on the yard through the window. The men had built a small fire, seemingly settling in for a wait. They passed a bottle between them, their voices carrying occasionally on the breeze, though Katherine couldn't make out their words. The scene would have looked almost innocent cowboys stopping for a rest if not for the predatory way Wade kept glancing toward the house. As the sun began its westward descent, Katherine's worry intensified. Owen would be returning soon, riding directly into whatever trap these men were setting. She needed to warn him somehow. An idea formed. Miguel had shown her the back trail that led from the house to the north pasture, a route that bypassed the main approach. If she could slip out unseen, she might be able to reach Owen before he returned. The risk was significant. If Wade's men caught her trying to leave, her situation would be worse than before. But staying and allowing Owen to ride into an ambush seemed the greater danger. Decision made, Katherine moved quickly. She put on her boots and a shawl, tucked the revolver into her pocket, and went to the back door that led from the kitchen to the garden. Peering carefully around the corner of the house, she saw that Wade and his men were focused on their fire and their bottle, their attention directed toward the main trail. Taking a deep breath, Katherine slipped out the door and moved swiftly through the garden to the cover of a small tool shed. From there, she could see the path that led up into the hills behind the house. If she could reach it without being seen, she'd be on her way to finding Owen. Heart in her throat, she darted from the shed to a stand of juniper trees, then to a rock formation that provided cover as she made her way toward the path. She was nearly there when a shout went up from the yard. "Hey, the woman's running." Katherine abandoned stealth for speed, racing for the path. Behind her, she heard the sounds of pursuit, running footsteps, men's voices. She didn't look back, concentrating only on reaching the trail that would lead her to Owen. The path rose steeply, winding among rocks and scattered pine trees. Katherine's lungs burned as she climbed, but fear drove her forward. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter. The men, unused to the terrain, were falling behind. She pressed on, following the trail as it wound higher into the hills. Miguel had said it was about 2 miles to the north pasture, this way shorter than the main route, but more challenging. Katherine silently blessed Mrs. Alvarez's cooking as she climbed, knowing that a month ago she wouldn't have had the strength for this. After what seemed like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, Katherine reached a vantage point where she could look back at the ranch. Wade's men had given up the direct pursuit but appeared to be spreading out, likely looking for alternate routes to cut her off. The danger was far from over. Gathering her remaining strength, Katherine continued along the trail, now moving downhill toward the north pasture. As she rounded a bend, she nearly collided with a rider coming the opposite direction. "Katherine," Owen's voice had never been more welcome. He was alone, riding Thunder, his expression shifting from surprise to concern as he took in her disheveled appearance and obvious distress. "Owen, thank God," she gasped. "There are men at the house, 6 of them. Their leader says his name is Garrett Wade. They're waiting for you, and I don't think they mean well." Owen's face darkened. "Wade," he muttered. "Get up behind me," he said, extending a hand to help her mount. "Quickly now." Katherine took his hand, letting him pull her up onto Thunder's back. The big horse snorted but stood steady as she settled behind Owen, her arms wrapping around his waist for balance. "Hold tight," Owen instructed, turning the horse away from the trail. "We're not going back to the house directly. There's somewhere safe I can take you first." He urged Thunder into a canter, following a game trail that Katherine hadn't noticed. They rode in tense silence, moving deeper into the hills until they reached a small cabin nestled in a grove of pines. "Old line shack," Owen explained as he helped her down. "Hardly anyone knows it's here." "You'll be safe." "What about you?" Katherine demanded. "You can't go back there alone. Wade has 5 men with him." Owen's expression was grim. "This isn't your fight, Katherine. Wade's an old enemy. He lost some land to me in a poker game years ago, land that turned out to have water rights he didn't know about. He's been nursing that grudge ever since." "All the more reason not to face him alone," Katherine argued. "We should ride to town, get the sheriff." Owen shook his head. "Sheriff Jenkins is away at the territorial capital this week. By the time we got to town and found someone willing to help, Wade could have burned Crosswind to the ground." His jaw set in a determined line. "No, I need to deal with this now." Katherine caught his arm as he turned to remount. "Owen, please, there must be another way." The concern in her eyes seemed to reach him. His expression softened slightly. "Miguel and the Parker brothers should be on their way back by now. If I can get to them before Wade's men do, we'll have a more even match. And if you can't—" Owen hesitated, then reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a second revolver. "Then I'll have to be smarter than Wade. It wouldn't be the first time." He held the gun out to Katherine. "You know how to use this," she nodded, withdrawing the one she'd taken from his desk. "I already came prepared." A smile flickered across his face. "Of course you did." He tucked the second gun back into his saddlebag. "Stay here. There's food and water in the cabin. I'll come for you when it's safe." Katherine wanted to argue further, but the determination in Owen's eyes told her it would be useless. He wasn't being reckless, he was protecting what was his, what they were building together. "Be careful," she said instead. "Please." Owen hesitated, then stepped closer, one hand reaching up to gently touch her cheek. "I will," he promised softly. "For you." Before Katherine could respond, he turned and mounted Thunder, riding swiftly back the way they had come. She watched until he disappeared among the trees, then entered the cabin to wait. The interior was simple but clean, a single room with a bed, table, chairs, and a small stove. Shelves held basic supplies: canned goods, coffee, hardtack. A water barrel in the corner was nearly full. Owen had clearly maintained the place as a refuge in case of emergency. Katherine paced the small space, the revolver a reassuring weight in her pocket. Hours passed with excruciating slowness as she imagined various scenarios unfolding at the ranch. Had Owen found Miguel and the Parkers? Were they facing Wade and his men now? Or had something gone terribly wrong? As dusk fell, Katherine lit the lamp she found on the table, its warm glow doing little to dispel her growing fear. She should never have let Owen go alone. She should have insisted they ride to town together, or at least come up with a better plan. A sound outside made her freeze, footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate. Katherine drew the revolver, moving to stand beside the door, out of sight of anyone entering. "Katherine." Owen's voice, pitched low, came through the door. "It's me. It's over." She nearly collapsed with relief, lowering the gun and opening the door. Owen stood there, silhouetted against the darkening sky. He looked tired but unharmed. "Are you all right?" she demanded, scanning him for injuries. "What happened?" Owen stepped inside, removing his hat. "Wade's gone. For good this time, I think." He sank into one of the chairs, running a hand through his hair. "Miguel and the Parkers were on their way back when I found them. Together, we managed to surprise Wade's men. There was a brief standoff, but they weren't expecting resistance." "There was no shooting?" Katherine asked anxiously. "A few shots fired, but no one was hit," Owen assured her. "Wade's not a fool, whatever else he may be. When he realized he was outmatched, he backed down." I made it clear that if he ever came near Crosswind again, I wouldn't be as merciful. Katherine sat in the chair opposite him, the tension of the day finally catching up to her. I was so afraid, she admitted. When I saw them ride up and then when you insisted on going back alone. Owen reached across the table, his hand covering hers. You were incredibly brave, he said quietly. Coming to warn me, risking yourself like that. Not many women would have had the courage. I couldn't let you ride into a trap, Katherine said simply. Not when I could prevent it. Owen's eyes held hers, something unspoken passing between them. You could have hidden in the house, you could have run for town, but you chose to find me. The implication was clear. She had chosen him his safety over her own. Yes, Katherine acknowledged softly. I did. Owen's hand tightened on hers. Why? It was a simple question, but the answer was anything but. Katherine took a deep breath, knowing that whatever she said now would change things between them irrevocably. Because you matter to me, she said finally. Because in the short time I've been at Crosswind, you've shown me more kindness and respect than I've known in years. Because, she faltered, then gathered her courage. Because I'm starting to believe that what we're building together might be something real, something worth protecting. Owen was very still, his eyes never leaving hers. Katherine, he said, his voice rough with emotion, I need to ask you something and I need you to answer honestly. She nodded, her heart pounding. Are you staying? He asked simply. Not just for now, not just until something better comes along. Are you choosing Crosswind? Are you choosing me? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with all the unspoken hopes and fears of the past weeks. Katherine knew what her answer meant, not just marriage in name, but a true partnership, a sharing of lives and dreams and futures. Yes, she said, her voice steady despite the tears that threatened. I'm choosing you, Owen, if you'll still have me. The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after the longest night. If I'll still have you, he repeated, shaking his head in wonder. Katherine Stewart, I've been yours since you stepped down from that stagecoach. He rose, moving around the table to kneel beside her chair. Taking both her hands in his, he looked up at her with such naked hope that it made her breath catch. I want to do this properly, he said. No more arrangements or agreements. Katherine, will you marry me? Not because you need a home or I need a wife, but because we've found something in each other worth building a life around. Tears spilled freely down Katherine's cheeks now. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Owen, I will. He reached up, his hand gently cupping her face, thumb brushing away a tear. May I kiss you? He asked softly. I've been wanting to for weeks. Katherine nodded, unable to speak past the emotion closing her throat. Owen rose slightly, leaning in to press his lips gently against hers. The kiss was tender, almost reverent, a promise rather than a demand. Katherine's eyes fluttered closed as she leaned into him, her hands coming up to rest lightly on his shoulders. When they parted, Owen pressed his forehead to hers, his breath warm against her lips. We should get back to the ranch, he murmured. Miguel will be worried. Katherine nodded reluctantly. And my apple pie is probably burned to a crisp. Owen laughed, the sound filled with genuine joy. I'll eat it anyway, he promised, even if it's black as coal. The ride back to Crosswind was different from the journey out, slower, more peaceful, with Katherine's arms wrapped securely around Owen's waist, not from necessity, but from choice. The night had fully descended, stars scattered like diamond dust across the black velvet sky. An owl called from somewhere in the darkness, its voice a lonely counterpoint to the steady rhythm of thunder's hooves. When they reached the ranch house, they found Miguel waiting anxiously on the porch. His face broke into a relieved smile at the sight of them. Gracias a Dios, he exclaimed. I was beginning to worry. His eyes darted between them, noting their clasped hands as they approached. A knowing smile spread across his face. "Ah, I see there is good news besides Wade's departure." Owen nodded, his expression serious despite the happiness radiating from him. "Miguel, Miss Stewart has agreed to become my wife officially this time." Miguel's grin widened. "It is about time, patron. Mrs. Alvarez will be most pleased. She has been lighting candles to San Antonio for weeks." Katherine laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "I hope San Antonio doesn't mind that we sorted it out ourselves. Saints are very understanding about such things," Miguel assured her solemnly, though his eyes twinkled. "Now, come inside. I have saved your pie, señorita. It is only a little bit burned." The kitchen was warm and inviting, the apple pie sitting on the counter with only its edges slightly blackened. Miguel had prepared a simple supper as well: beans, bacon, and the last of the morning's biscuits warmed in the oven. They ate together at the kitchen table, the events of the day giving way to plans for the future. "We should be married soon," Owen said, his hand finding Katherine's beneath the table, "before winter sets in. But I want to do things properly, a church wedding, if that's what you'd like." The thought of standing before the town in a proper wedding dress, making her vows in the sight of God and community, filled Katherine with unexpected happiness. "I would like that," she admitted, "though I don't need anything elaborate." "Then it's settled," Owen declared. "Next Sunday, we'll go to town and speak with Reverend Thomas, and you can see Mrs. Fletcher about a wedding dress." Miguel slipped away after dinner, citing an early morning ahead. Left alone, Owen and Katherine moved to the porch, where they had spent so many evenings in careful conversation. Tonight, there was no need for caution. Owen pulled Katherine gently into his arms, her back against his chest as they looked out at the star-filled sky. "Are you happy?" he asked softly, his breath warm against her ear. Katherine leaned back into his embrace, feeling the solid strength of him behind her. "Happier than I ever thought I could be," she answered truthfully. "When I left Boston, I hoped for safety, for basic kindness. I never dared hope for this, for someone who would see me, truly see me." Owen's arms tightened slightly around her waist. "I saw you that first day," he confessed. "Not just the bruises or the fear, though those were there. I saw your courage, your determination to start again despite everything you'd been through." He pressed a gentle kiss to her temple. "I fell a little in love with you right then, I think." Katherine turned in his arms, looking up at his face in the moonlight. "And now?" she asked softly. "Now," Owen smiled, his eyes filled with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "Now I'm completely in love with you, Katherine Stewart. And I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt it." He lowered his head to kiss her again, and Katherine rose on tiptoe to meet him halfway. This kiss was different from their first, deeper, less tentative, a promise of all they would become to each other in the days and years ahead. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Owen brushed a strand of hair from Katherine's face with gentle fingers. "It's getting late," he said reluctantly. "You should rest. It's been a trying day." Katherine nodded, though she was reluctant to leave the circle of his arms. "Will you be all right after everything with Wade?" "I'll be fine," Owen assured her. "Wade won't be back. And if he is fool enough to try, he'll find that Crosswind is better defended than ever." His expression softened. "Especially now that I have something even more precious to protect." The words warmed Katherine from within. For so long, she had been alone in the world, fighting her own battles, nursing her wounds in private. Now, suddenly, she had a defender, a partner who considered her well-being as important as his own. "Good night, then," she said softly, stepping toward the door. "I'll see you in the morning." Owen caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Dreams, sweet dreams, Katherine. Tomorrow begins the rest of our lives." The week that followed was a whirlwind of activity. On Sunday, they rode to Nogales together, attending the morning service at the small white church on the edge of town. After the service, they spoke with Reverend Thomas, a kindly man in his 60s who listened with obvious pleasure to their request for a wedding ceremony. 2 weeks from today, the Reverend suggested. That will give us time to post the banns properly, and for you to make your preparations. The date settled, they visited the dressmaker next. Mrs. Fletcher was overjoyed at the news, immediately abandoning the everyday dresses she'd been working on in favor of designing a wedding gown. Nothing too elaborate, Katherine insisted, mindful of both practicality and the short timeline. Something simple but beautiful. Mrs. Fletcher nodded enthusiastically. I have just the fabric, a cream silk that came in on the last shipment from California, with a touch of lace at the collar and cuffs. Oh, you'll be lovely, my dear. News of their engagement spread quickly through Nogales. As Katherine and Owen walked down the main street, they were met with congratulations and good wishes from most of the townspeople. Even Mrs. Bradley managed a tight smile and murmured felicitation when they encountered her outside the bank. Ignore her, Owen whispered as they passed. She'll find another target for her ambitions soon enough. The return to Crosswind was accompanied by a sense of anticipation that Katherine had never experienced before. She was no longer a mail-order bride seeking refuge. She was a woman choosing her future, building a life with a man she had come to love. Mrs. Alvarez's reaction to the news was everything Miguel had predicted. The housekeeper alternated between tears of joy and brisk efficiency as she made lists of what needed to be done before the wedding. The house must be perfect, she declared. We will clean everything, top to bottom, and the food for the celebration I will speak with my sister about the cake. Katherine found herself swept along in the preparations, grateful for the older woman's guidance. There were moments when it all seemed overwhelming, the speed with which her life was changing, the public nature of the commitment she was making. But whenever doubt crept in, she had only to look at Owen to feel her resolve strengthen. He was steadfast through it all, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, always ensuring she had space to breathe amid the flurry of wedding preparations. Their evenings on the porch became precious interludes of peace, a time to talk about their hopes for the future and occasionally to steal sweet kisses under the starry sky. We'll need to build on, Owen said one night as they discussed the practicalities of their life together. A bigger kitchen, perhaps another bedroom or two. He trailed off, color rising in his cheeks. For children, Katherine finished softly. Owen nodded, his eyes meeting hers with a question in them. If you want them, he said carefully. I know we haven't discussed it yet. The thought of children, of building a family with Owen, filled Katherine with a mixture of hope and anxiety. Her own childhood had been happy until her parents' deaths. She knew what a loving family could be. But the years after, the hardships and cruelties she'd endured had left their marks on her soul. I do want them, she admitted. Someday, but perhaps not right away. I'd like some time for just us first. Relief and understanding crossed Owen's face. Of course, he agreed readily. We have all the time in the world, Katherine. There's no rush for any of it. His willingness to wait, to let their relationship develop at its own pace, was one of the things Katherine loved most about him. Owen never demanded, never assumed, never took. He offered, suggested, invited, and accepted her choices with grace. As the wedding day approached, Katherine found herself growing increasingly certain of her decision. The fears that had haunted her first days at Crosswind, that Owen might change once she had committed herself, that the ranch might become another prison rather than a home, had faded in the face of his consistent kindness and respect. 2 days before the wedding, Mrs. Fletcher arrived at the ranch with Catherine's completed gown. Owen was banished from the house while the final fitting took place in the bedroom that would soon be theirs together. "It's beautiful," Katherine breathed as she stood before the small mirror, hardly recognizing herself in the elegant cream silk that flowed from her shoulders to the floor in simple, graceful lines. Delicate lace edged the modest neckline and the cuffs of the long sleeves, with tiny pearl buttons marching down the back. Mrs. Fletcher beamed with pride. "You look radiant, my dear. Mr. Forrester won't be able to take his eyes off you." Mrs. Alvarez, watching from the doorway, dabbed at her eyes with her apron. "Like an angel," she declared. "The most beautiful bride Nogales has ever seen." The compliments brought color to Catherine's cheeks. After so many years of trying to be invisible, of dressing to avoid attention, it was strange to be the center of such admiration. Strange, but not unwelcome. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, a perfect October Sunday with just a hint of crispness in the air. By tradition, Owen had spent the night at the Parker brothers' cabin, leaving Katherine alone in the ranch house with Mrs. Alvarez, who had stayed over to help with preparations. "It is bad luck for the groom to see the bride before the wedding," the housekeeper had insisted when Owen protested the arrangement. Now, as Katherine sat at her dressing table while Mrs. Alvarez arranged her hair, the reality of the day ahead began to sink in. In a few hours, she would be Mrs. Owen Forrester, mistress of Crosswind Ranch, a wife with all that entailed. "You are nervous," Mrs. Alvarez observed, her deft fingers weaving flowers into Catherine's upswept hair. "This is normal. But Mr. Forrester, he is a good man, the best man. You will be happy together." Katherine met the older woman's eyes in the mirror. "I know," she said softly. "I'm not afraid of being his wife. I'm just overwhelmed by how much has changed. 3 months ago I was in Boston, desperate and alone, and now you are home, Mrs. Alvarez finished for her, patting her shoulder. "This is God's plan for you, Nina, to bring you from darkness into light." The simple faith in the woman's words touched Katherine deeply. Perhaps it was true, perhaps all the hardships had led her here, to this place, to this man, to this new beginning. When she was finally ready, dressed in her wedding gown with a crown of wildflowers in her hair, Katherine took a moment alone in her room. She thought of her parents, wishing they could see her now, hoping they would approve of the man she had chosen. She thought of the girl she had been in Boston, and silently promised that frightened, wounded soul that she was safe now, that she would be loved and protected for all her days. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Katherine," Miguel called. "The wagon is ready. It is time to go to the church." Katherine took a deep breath, picked up the small bouquet of autumn flowers that Mrs. Alvarez had prepared, and opened the door to her future. The little church in Nogales was filled to capacity when Katherine arrived. It seemed the entire town had turned out for the occasion, along with ranchers and their families from the surrounding area. Mrs. Alvarez and Miguel escorted her to the church door, where Reverend Thomas waited to lead her down the aisle. And there, at the altar, stood Owen. He had never looked more handsome than he did in that moment, dressed in a new black suit, his wheat-colored hair neatly trimmed, his face clean-shaven for the occasion. But it was his expression as he turned and saw her that Katherine would remember for the rest of her life, the mix of awe and joy and love that transformed his features, as if he were witnessing a miracle. The walk down the aisle passed in a blur. Katherine was aware of faces turning to watch her, of smiles and whispers, but her focus remained on Owen, on the man waiting to join his life with hers. When she reached him and placed her hand in his, the trembling that had plagued her all morning finally stilled. "You are so beautiful," Owen whispered, his voice husky with emotion. Reverend Thomas smiled benevolently at them both before turning to address the congregation. "Dearly beloved," he began, "we are gathered here today in the sight of God and these witnesses to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful. They exchanged traditional vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish each other for as long as they both should live. Owen slipped a gold band onto Catherine's finger, a ring that had belonged to his mother. He later told her and looked into her eyes with such tenderness that she thought her heart might burst with happiness. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Thomas declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." He beamed at Owen. "You may kiss your bride." Owen leaned down, his lips meeting Catherine's in a kiss that was both gentle and filled with promise. The congregation erupted in applause and cheers, but for a moment it was as if they were alone in the world, sealed in a bubble of perfect joy. The celebration that followed at Crosswind Ranch lasted well into the evening. Tables had been set up in the yard, laden with food prepared by Mrs. Alvarez and the women of neighboring ranches. Music filled the air as a local fiddler and guitarist played lively tunes, encouraging dancing and merriment. Katherine moved through it all in a daze of happiness, Owen's hand warm and steady at the small of her back as they greeted their guests and accepted congratulations. She danced with her new husband under the afternoon sun, laughing as he twirled her carefully, mindful of her beautiful dress. "Are you happy, Mrs. Forrester?" he asked, his eyes never leaving hers as they moved to the music. "Completely," she answered truthfully. "Are you?" His smile was answer enough, but he leaned close to whisper in her ear, "More than I ever thought possible. You have made me the luckiest man in Arizona territory." As twilight fell, the guests began to depart, offering final congratulations and good wishes. Miguel and the Parker brothers took charge of the cleanup, insisting that the newlyweds shouldn't have to worry about such things on their wedding day. Finally, as the last lanterns were extinguished in the yard, Owen took Catherine's hand and led her toward the house, their home now, truly and completely. At the threshold he paused, looking down at her with a question in his eyes. "May I?" he asked softly. Katherine nodded, understanding his intent. With a smooth motion, Owen swept her into his arms, carrying her across the threshold as tradition demanded. Inside, he set her gently on her feet but kept his arms around her, unwilling to let go just yet. "Welcome home, Katherine Forrester," he murmured, his forehead resting against hers. "It's been home for some time now," she admitted. "Since the day I realized I wanted to stay, since the day I realized I loved you." Owen's breath caught at her words. "When was that?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Katherine smiled, remembering the moment with perfect clarity. "When I was running up that hill trying to find you before Wade did. I realized I wasn't just afraid for myself, I was terrified of losing you. That's when I knew." Owen drew her closer, his kiss more urgent now that they were alone, husband and wife, in the privacy of their home. Katherine responded with equal fervor, her arms twining around his neck as she gave herself fully to the moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Owen's eyes were dark with desire but also with tenderness. "We have all night," he reminded her softly. "There's no rush." The consideration in his words, the reminder that even now, as her husband, he would follow her lead and respect her pace, filled Catherine's heart to overflowing. "I love you, Owen Forrester," she whispered. "With all that I am." He smiled, taking her hand and leading her toward the stairs. "And I love you, Katherine Forrester. Today, tomorrow, and for all the days of our lives." 2 years later, Katherine stood on the porch of Crosswind Ranch, watching as a rider approached in the distance. Even from here, she would know that silhouette anywhere. Owen, returning from a trip to Nogales with supplies and, hopefully, letters from back east. So much had changed in the time since their wedding day. The ranch had prospered under their joint management, with Katherine proving herself as skilled with accounts and planning as Owen was with the practical aspects of ranching. They had built onto the house as planned, adding a larger kitchen and 2 additional bedrooms, one of which now served as a nursery. Katherine glanced behind her through the open door, where their 6-month-old son, James, was napping in his cradle. He had his father's blue eyes and sturdy build, but Katherine's dark hair and determined nature. From the moment of his birth, he had been the center of their world, the physical embodiment of the love they had built together. Owen drew closer, and Katherine could see he was smiling, waving as he spotted her on the porch. She waved back, her heart still quickening at the sight of him even after all this time. When he reached the house, Owen dismounted and crossed the yard in long strides. "There's my beautiful wife," he called, his voice warm with affection. Katherine met him at the steps, rising on tiptoe to kiss him in greeting. "Welcome home. We've missed you." Owen wrapped his arms around her, breathing in the scent of her hair. "I've only been gone since morning," he reminded her with a chuckle. "Even so," Katherine said, leading him inside, "James has been asking for you." Owen raised an eyebrow, amusement dancing in his eyes. "Has he now? Our 6-month-old son has developed speech in my absence." "Well, not in so many words," Katherine admitted with a laugh. "But he's been fussy all day. I think he knows when you're not here." They moved to the cradle where James slept peacefully, one tiny fist curled beside his cheek. Owen gazed down at his son with undisguised adoration. "He's growing so fast," he murmured. "Seems like yesterday he was just born." Katherine leaned against her husband's solid frame, contentment washing over her. "Were there any letters?" she asked. Owen nodded, reaching into his pocket. "One from your friend Sarah in Boston." He handed her the envelope, watching as she broke the seal eagerly. Katherine had reconnected with her childhood friend shortly after the wedding, sending a letter to the only address she still remembered from her life in Boston. Sarah's reply had been joyful and immediate, full of news and questions about Katherine's new life. Their correspondence had become a regular part of Katherine's connection to her past, not the painful parts she wanted to forget, but the good memories that deserved to be preserved. "She's coming to visit," Katherine exclaimed after scanning the letter. "In the spring, if we're agreeable. She says she's always wanted to see the West." Owen smiled at her excitement. "Of course she's welcome. It will be good for you to see a familiar face from home." "Crosswind is my home now," Katherine corrected gently. "Boston is just where I began." Owen's expression softened as he drew her into his arms. "I thank God every day for bringing you here," he said quietly, "for giving me the courage to place that advertisement and you the courage to answer it." Katherine rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Do you remember what you promised me that first day? When I arrived, bruised and frightened and not sure if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. That you would heal under my care," Owen recalled, his voice gentle. "That you would be safe here." "You kept that promise," Katherine said, looking up at him with eyes full of love. "You gave me space to heal, time to trust, room to become strong again." She touched his face, tracing the familiar lines with tender fingers. "But it wasn't just your care that healed me, Owen. It was your respect, your patience, your willingness to see me as I am and love me anyway." Owen turned his head to press a kiss to her palm. "Loving you has been the easiest thing I've ever done," he said simply. "The most natural." James stirred in his cradle, making small noises that signaled he would soon be fully awake. Katherine smiled, moving to lift her son into her arms. "Someone knows his papa is home," she said as the baby's eyes fluttered open. Owen reached for his son, cradling him with practiced ease. James immediately grabbed for his father's finger, holding on with surprising strength for one so small. "That's my boy," Owen said proudly. "Strong like his mother." Katherine watched them together, her heart so full it seemed impossible it could contain so much joy. From the broken, frightened woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Nogales 2 years ago to the confident, beloved wife and mother, she was today. The journey had been one of healing, yes, but also of discovery. Of finding strength she didn't know she possessed, of learning to trust again, of opening herself to love and being loved in return. "Come," she said, taking Owen's free hand. "Let's sit on the porch and watch the sunset. It's a beautiful evening." Together, the three of them, a family built from courage and hope and love, moved to the porch where their story had truly begun. As the sun dipped toward the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Katherine looked at her husband and son and knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place in the world. Here at Crosswind Ranch, under Owen's patient care and within the circle of his love, she had healed. But more than that, she had flourished, becoming not just the woman she had been before life's cruelties, but someone stronger, braver, more fully herself than she had ever dared to be. And in that becoming, she had found not just healing, but wholeness, not just safety, but joy, not just a husband, but a true partner for all her days to come. "I love you," she whispered, leaning against Owen's shoulder as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. He turned to press a kiss to her forehead, his eyes filled with a devotion that had only deepened with time. "And I love you," he replied, "today, tomorrow, and for all our tomorrows after that." James cooed between them, a sound of perfect contentment that echoed in Katherine's heart. This was what she had crossed a continent to find, not just escape from pain, but the promise of joy. Not just the absence of fear, but the presence of love. The desert had indeed stripped everything down to essentials, just as Owen had said. And what remained was true as the stars overhead, as enduring as the mountains on the horizon, as real as the family they had built together. What remained was love, and it was enough, more than enough, to last a lifetime.